work with both people who exhibit these behaviors as kind of an offender or perpetrator, and also victims.
Yes, so I work with both sides, both the victims and the offenders as well.
Okay. So let's just jump back into it here. You read the report here. What kind of jumps out at you when you see the allegations against Mr. Terry Gray, and it went on, it seems like, for many years?
So really, when I was reading the report, it just jumped out at me that it took so long for Mr. Gray to actually be discovered in the community that he was a part of. It's really devastating to me that it took so many years before his behaviors came to light. And I think it is just so sad for the families that are involved, of course, the victims themselves, and just that community as a whole. I think it is just devastating that they're going through this right now.
And you mentioned the years that have gone on, and from what I've read, it sounded like there was a number of people that saw behavior that was questionable, that was suspicious, that raised alarms, and yet it didn't seem like anyone had gone to an authority or somewhere that could be investigative in terms of the, like, maybe the authorities. Is that common in a situation like this? Why do we see that?
So, unfortunately, it is fairly common that when there is inappropriate sexual behavior, people oftentimes do not speak up. And oftentimes it can be because they're afraid of retaliation. Sometimes they wonder if what they're seeing is actually sexual abuse, or does it kind of walk a fine line? And so they're trying to determine whether it's something that should be reported. A lot of times people wonder, who do I even report this to? And so sometimes people just turn a blind eye, and it is very, very sad because these crimes go, unreported, oftentimes unnoticed, and therefore these perpetrators continue to reoffend over and over again until they're finally caught and arrested.
And we've talked about this before, but whenever there's this power inequity, it seems like these are kind of relationships that may lend itself to this type of abuse. Is this a situation that is part of that power inequity, and why is it so maybe so prevalent with this type of maybe abuse?
Yes, there was absolutely a power inequity between this coach and his victims. It is very clear that he used his position as their coach to groom them, to abuse them. It even appears, after reading the report, that there may have been some intimidation going on, which is also, a grooming behavior. It's definitely a red flag. And so, because there was that power differential, it definitely gave him a little bit more access to these young girls, and allowed him to go as far as he did.
And so, as a parent, this is certainly alarming. And what are some of the tips that you may suggest, or things that I should kind of key into if I suspect or I'm worried that something might be happening?
I think that it is crucial that as a parent, you speak to your child, long before, anything actually happens to your child, and hopefully nothing ever occurs to your child, and the discussion is truly just that, and it never advances to anything more. But you need to talk to your children, and not once they hit the teenage years, but I'm talking about even earlier on. As soon as they're able to communicate, you want to talk about appropriate and inappropriate touch. You want to talk about, feelings of being uncomfortable and trusting your gut instincts. And if something doesn't feel right, it is so important that kids are aware they can come to mom or they can come to dad, and they can express to them how they're feeling. Even as far as, if they don't want, their uncle to give them a hug, or they don't want to sit on their grandfather's lap. That should never be forced, or it should never be pushed if a child is uncomfortable with that. We do have to trust our own instincts as parents, but also kids need to rely on their instincts as well because they also have very strong instincts.
And you mentioned some, like it was almost like textbook behaviors. You mentioned the grooming. You also mentioned previously the maybe favoritism. Could you just kind of boil down some of the behaviors that you see as a professional? It seemed to jump out at you in this report.
Absolutely. So some of the red flags that parents definitely want to keep an eye out for is favoritism. So if you see someone that's involved in your child's life, an adult, you definitely want to pay attention to whether or not they're making your child a favorite, playing favoritism, because oftentimes favoritism can be a red flag, a sign of something more. It sometimes can be absolutely nothing, but you definitely want to look into it and see, if there is favoritism there, if it's something deeper. Also, any secret keeping. So, if you find that your child is keeping secrets with an adult in their life, whether it's a teacher, a coach, even a family member, that's definitely a red flag, and it's important to further investigate that. The other red flag that's really important to keep an eye on is physical touch between your child and any adult. And so, a lot of times, perpetrators will test the boundaries. And so, it might just start with a hug or, a rub of the leg or brushing up against the child. And so, it's important to watch out for those behaviors. And you know like I said earlier, if you feel uncomfortable with them as the parent, or if the child themselves feels uncomfortable, it's very important to put an end to those behaviors, because they could mean more. The perpetrator is testing those boundaries, and so one of those grooming behaviors is physical touch, and they're looking to see how far the victim will let them go, before they put a stop to it. And with children, they're oftentimes scared. They oftentimes are confused. And so they might not stop the physical touch and still feel very, very uncomfortable with it. And a perpetrator might continue the physical touch even though he sees that the victim is uncomfortable with what he or she is doing.
Mm. Allison, anything else I didn't ask or that you think we need to add at all?
Just uh, some of the important pieces here that should be discussed with children early on, and some of the things that parents might want to implement is, no overnight stays with adults who are not, immediate family, especially when the child is alone. So, if the child is going to be spending the night somewhere, have another friend present, or a sibling present, but just the child alone with an adult for an overnight is definitely something to be wary of. Also, it's important that parents have access to their child's electronic devices, especially cell phones. Even really monitoring the apps on these phones, because they do have messaging apps and all different types of apps these days that the children can message and send pictures with adults. And so you want to really look at who is your child talking to, and monitor these conversations, especially when it's with an adult. Also, it's important from a very, very early age to talk to your child about the dangers of secret keeping. So, not promoting any secrets being kept within the family and also outside of the family. You want to tell your child that if somebody asks you to keep a secret, it's very, very important that they share that with mom or dad or both, because secrets can oftentimes lead to further behaviors and also can be a warning sign. The other thing is, we talked about grooming behaviors and told, or, we're telling parents what to look out for, but we also need to talk to children about, what grooming looks like and what they need to look out for, because prevention is so important here. If we can prevent something like this from occurring by paying attention to the red flags, paying attention to grooming behaviors, we will be so far ahead of what's to come in a lot of these cases. And so we definitely want to discuss what grooming looks like with children. Also, we really want to be wary of adults that show children favoritism, which we discussed earlier. That's very, very critical. Also, talking to children about trusting their instincts, because instincts are extremely important here. And as a parent, if you feel like just something's not right, or you get just an uncomfortable feeling around someone, listen to those instincts and talk about them. And don't be afraid that you're being paranoid or you're being overly cautious or overly protective. We have instincts for a reason, and we need to listen to those instincts. And lastly, if your child does report any type of inappropriate behavior, whether it's considered sexual abuse or not, report it. There's no harm in reporting it, because we want to make sure that we are keeping the children of our community safe.